Lovers of lore, thank you for joining me for this installment of the Brothers War story. So as usual, we're jumping all over the place in time. We're going to be covering the present day in this story. We're going to be talking about Elspeth on Dominaria, all right? So she has been at Urza's tower for about a week. On Dominaria, she has been put in charge of all of the constructs, but she's feeling rusty with her skills and frustrated, so she ends up sparring with one of these constructs. It doesn't really go well, and she throws her gear off to the side in frustration. But at that point, Ren and Seven shows up with her shield. They have a little conversation. Ren's talking about how Elspeth's soul is singing two conflicting songs, but Elspeth doesn't really want to hear what she has to say about that. And the conversation is interrupted anyways, because Ren senses two people outside in the rain. So they stop what they're doing and go and investigate. And these two individuals are covered in a green glow. And it turns out that it was actually Nissa and Chandra. So after a friendly little meeting between the four planeswalkers, they were escorted to Kayla. At that point, Elspeth left to get back to work, setting up defensive magic devices on the watchtower. Even with these duties, she had too much time to think about Ajani and Daxos and Giada and any other number of concerns. But ultimately, she comes across Chandra, who is hanging out with Joda, and they're drinking, talking about Jaya and the past. Elspeth initially doesn't want to get involved with their conversation, but they convince her to join them, and she does. Now, she doesn't know Jaya, so they're toasting Jaya. She speaks of Venser, and then together, they all toast Jaya, Venser, and Gideon. That night, Phyrexians unexpectedly attacked. There were explosions everywhere. Elspeth raced to Saheeli's workshop. The temporal anchor was hissing and vibrating. Saheeli was doing everything in her power to stop it from breaking apart. You have to understand that Teferi was in the machine at this very moment, and Kea is there, visibly struggling to keep the ghost form over the device. And Elspeth yells to Saheeli, "We're under attack. Please tell me you have what you need." But Saheeli says sadly, "Not yet. And this is our last chance." So Elspeth and Joda head off to see to the defenses against the Phyrexians. Elspeth mobilized all the constructs under her command she had scattered around the tower. There were over 100 different construct soldiers. They marched forward into defensive patterns with about a dozen clay statues to back them up. But the Phyrexians had a skyship. Nissa and Chandra were manning the defensive magic that was used to kind of hold off the skyship, but things weren't looking that well. Phyrexian horrors had showed up in high numbers. Some of them were half knight, half horse, so they had crazy beastly legs and giant armored tops. But worse than that were the winged ones. They had armored torsos, and they flew in and had skittering little spider legs and things like that. And unfortunately for Elspeth, she had not accounted for flyers in her plan. So when it came to defending the tower, they were going to be a bit more of an issue. Now, the Phyrexians charge right in towards the defensive position. And at the last moment, Joda makes a gesture, and it turns out he had laid illusion magic over the terrain. So the Phyrexians end up slamming into a spike barricade made out of wood, and they end up getting impaled on it. And immediately after this first wave of Phyrexians gets impaled on it, Joda snaps his fingers and sets it on fire. So now some of the flyers are coming over this wall. Some of them are picking up some of the Phyrexians, helping them get over this barricade wall. And some of the Phyrexians are literally clambering up over the flaming bodies of other Phyrexians. It's an intense situation. So Elspeth has this magical lance with a power stone in it. It's a one-time use device, but it ends up mowing down a ton of these Phyrexians. Elspeth also ordered the constructs to charge and laid into the Phyrexians with her special halo blade. The Phyrexians stood no chance against Elspeth. It didn't take long for them to realize she was a special case, and they started to give her a wide berth. As for the flyers, the clay statues turned out to be pretty handy. They leapt up into the air pulled the flyers down and tore them apart. Between Elspeth's hammering of the Phyrexians and the clay statues and other constructs, they were able to win a complete victory. Joda and Elspeth wearily hugged, but their victory was short-lived because the sky ship from before comes swooping in and it starts to unfold and it grows massive legs and arms and it's got blood-red Phyrexian symbols glowing in its body. It's a gigantic, unstoppable behemoth, but it has to be stopped. So Elspeth and Joda race up to it. They're so tiny and insignificant in comparison to it. But Joda has a plan. He has a spell that he got from Jaya, and it was originally meant for Chandra, but he realizes that Elspeth is a font of light magic, and light magic is actually close enough to fire magic that they can probably make this spell work. So he tells Elspeth he has the plan, and he starts to speak in an arcane tongue, at the same time telling Elspeth, let go of everything. You have to move past your boundaries. So Elspeth thought of Theros, and she felt a duality of existence where she was both on Dominaria and Theros at the same time. But she pushed even further than that until she almost lost herself, and she wasn't just Elspeth, but something more. At that point, Joda told her to draw the power into herself. So she started to pull it inwards. The torrent of power was so intense, it started to burn her, threatening to unmake her on the spot if she didn't release it. That's when Joda told her, focus on what matters most. So she did. A Johnny came to her mind. A Johnny trusted her to rescue him. So she pushed the power outwards. It surged upwards in a radiant, defiant blast. The magic expanded around both her and Joda. Jaya's spell created a firestorm of pure angelic energy. The towering Phyrexian started to melt under the onslaught, eventually vaporizing away into nothingness. Joda and Elspeth stood alone in the rain. Not a trace of the monstrosity remained. Their elation was short-lived, though. It became evident that the tower was under further attack. This was just a distraction, said Elspeth. Yes, said a voice behind her. They turned around surprised. It was Rona. Rona wasted no time. She blasted them both with lightning, knocking them off of their feet. Elspeth scrambled towards her sword, while Rona at the same time ran over to Jonah and jammed her spear directly down into his gut while he cried out. Rona looked down at Joda with disdain and anger. This is for Yavimaya. Elspeth screamed, no! But she was so worn out from the spell that she just cast that when Rona leapt towards her, she could barely parry the attack. In fact, that's what happened for a significant amount of time. Elspeth would basically just get out of the way at the last moment while Rona kept swinging at her. Elspeth's plan was to wait for the right second, and then basically she throws her buckler up and allows Rona to stab through the buckler straight into Elspeth's arm. And then Elspeth uses that opportunity to chop downwards with her sword straight into Rona's shoulder, and both of them crumple to the ground together. Rona's down for the count at this point, but Elspeth is still somewhat able to move, so she is fumbling for her halo to save Joda. But then she hears another voice. It's Tezzeret. He walks over and removes the spear that stuck in Elspeth's arm, and he looks over at Rona and then turns back to Elspeth and says, it's a shame Rona survived. Next time, aim better. And then he grabs Rona by the collar and lifts her up like a bag of trash and says to Elspeth, get out of here while you can. Elspeth spits her defiance back. I'll stop you and your Phyrexian masters. Tezzeret calmly points out, you're in no position to stop me. What you should be doing is tending to Joda. His life is far more important than fighting me. And Elspeth was shell-shocked at this point. She said, why are you sparing me? And Tezzeret explained, small cracks, that's how the mightiest edifices begin to crumble. May we never meet again. And then Tezzeret leaves. Now, there are undertones to this story as well of Ashiok, a letter that Ashiok has written to Elspeth, and it provides some interesting information. The first and most exciting part is information about the planeswalker Calix, who we know almost nothing about up until this point because we didn't get the actual Theros story that he was a part of. So Calix is a planeswalker who is an artificial being that was created by a god named Clothis, who's the god of fate. So it's unknown how she was able to create an artificial being that's able to planeswalk with a planeswalker spark. Calix didn't initially have a planeswalker spark or didn't know about his planeswalker spark, but he became able to planeswalk because he was created to follow Elspeth, and Elspeth went out into the blind eternities, and essentially Calix willed himself out into the blind eternities and wasn't destroyed by it. So he's very compelling in that way, but we get additional information because Ashiok is somebody who feeds on and witnesses people's dreams. So she has witnessed Calix's dreams, and through her, we learn some interesting facts about Calix. Calix was created as a bloodhound to find Elspeth and bring her back to Theros, because no one is allowed to escape their fate, and the god of fate will not accept that Elspeth as a planeswalker is able to just leave. So as a result, Calix will always be on her trail. Now, a unique aspect of Calix that's revealed is that whenever Calix dreams, which he must sleep to rejuvenate himself, whenever he dreams, then he actually dreams of Elspeth's real life, specifically all of the battles that she's been in. So during his dreams, he's studying her every move, but at the same time, underneath it, he also fears succeeding. So he desperately needs to catch Elspeth, but he's terrified of what will happen when he does, because once he drags Elspeth back to Theros, he's a tool with no purpose. What happens to him? What's his fate? Ultimately, he knows you can't avoid fate. So this is incredibly compelling and adds some real nice depth to Calix. But Ashiok being here as well, underneath all of this, is super interesting. She's writing a thank you letter for being led to the Phyrexians, because the Phyrexians are nightmares themselves. And as someone who feeds on nightmares, the nightmares of nightmares are especially delicious. But then on top of that, you have the fact that Elesh Norn is especially exquisite. If you didn't know, there's already a lore video on this channel detailing the nightmares of Elesh Norn that are fed on by Ashiok. So you can check that out if you're interested. It does involve some of the craziness of what's going on with this particular story. So it's quite impressive to take a look at what's going on with the different levels of Ashiok. Ashiok at the end of the story says that they declare themselves an admirer of Elspeth and will stay close by. Ashiok has big plans for the Phyrexians, and I, for one, am very curious to see what those plans are going to be. So that ends this installment of the Brothers War lore. The installments from today have been hype. There is a lot going on, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next. If you enjoy what we're doing here, then support the channel by joining the Patreon or channel membership. Thanks for coming by. I'll see you for the next video. And remember, my friends, lore is life.